We come to the final presentation of 2014. This is number 52. And in the series entitled Parayana, we've been looking at a future transform that is happening as we speak to the civilization that we have inherited and have come to realize again, as every node in the time rhythm, very, very vast and long, of civilization comes to recognize, is that time is an energy. And when a time form has run its course, its energy is depleting rapidly. And the civilized response to this has always been, we need to renew the energy in a new form, a new time form. And so the colloquial usage of the last generation, or a little before, is that we are in a new age. And styling it as an age, oddly enough, gives it a regressive quality that we've been exploring. It goes back to a time where the Roman Empire was formed, because a previous time form had run out and a new age was dawning, and the new age was commandeered, hijacked by the Roman Empire. In our time, the hijacking is by a world order empire, and it has a subterranean quality to it that this also involves aliens. In the previous time form, running out of energy, running out of time, needing a renewal of a new age, the quality was that we have a power that has a divine source, and that the divine source is wrapped in an archetype of actuality in time, in civilization, and that is that there is a divine king, a leader of mankind's structures of society, of political structure, of life and understanding, an arbiter of rituals, a generator of the correct myths, and that mythic experience with its language, its images, its feelings, are all able to be integrally commandeered and tied with the knots of a time form which allows for exact calculation. And it reminds one of the ancient Peruvian form of keeping time measurements, that of the quipu. The quipu was a cord that was knotted, and for each segment of a time form happening, one would tie a knot. And so the quipu was something that could be consulted by looking or even by touch, that you could keep track of where everything was, not just in its place, but it's in its place in its time signature. And we have something akin to that now, in that the understanding comes to be integrated and then tied in a knot so it will stay. And this was done in the Roman Empire with its new age, in the time of Augustus Caesar, and even before, in the time of Abraham, some 2,000 years before Augustus Caesar, and 2,000 years before Abraham in the time of Adam and Eve. And so this whole heritage of a massive cluster and complex of knots on every trajectory, every vector that is of possible value in civilization has now been brought together, bundled, as it were, and that all of this has been put into a cyclic, circling, encircling quality called a circuit now, so that the power will flow and the switch will turn on because it is cued to that dynamic. You're plugged in. This haunts, especially at the very end of a time form, not an age, but a time form, which is quite real in a strategic enormity that takes vision in order to behold it, and takes a sense of history in order to understand it. And that vision, as we've been exploring again and again, becomes something that the beholder, patiently in learning to look within vision rather than to look at what is being given, what is being represented, what is being instructed, following the complications to the knot, to the integral only, limited. This is how everything works and stays together because it works by staying where it's put. The knots, to those in vision, are obstructive, false puzzlings. They are dividing everything into jigsawed pieces that will fit into that picture, but that picture is indeed something artificial, and the most artificial signature that one could come up in terms of a mythic experience is that it is a mask, not someone. And not only a mask hiding the someoneness, but a mask that is geared to represent things and their actions, feelings and our source of nutrition, so that there are masks of foods. One can do a watermelon mask. One can do a grape mask, etc. Or there are masks of feeling. You can have the happy and tragic of a Greek drama, etc. And in the learning civilization program that we have, at last, long last, masks of food and masks of feeling interface together, back to back, so that the imaginative wearer of that pair of masks is able to establish that they are a presence rather than the source of either or even of both those masks. That one is not defined by what you eat or what you feel, though to some great extent it gives a definition in terms of identity. And it is the identity which is the knot formed by the conviction that identification is delimiting the context so that it becomes exact. And one can then have an identification which is more and more accurate in all of the terms of identity, and that the Uber identification is that I am I. A equals A, and that for sure. This quality of identity is extremely difficult, and one of the great books of the 1960s, about now 2 generations ago, was by a man named Frantz Fanon, and it was Black Skins, White Masks. And it was about the Caribbean blacks who were African, wearing the masks largely of French or British or Dutch or whatever colonial Spanish, whatever powers had come in as colonial powers and had then established that this island is thus and so, and that it must be thus and so. And one of the archetypal islands in the Caribbean that had this was Haiti, French, one of the prizes of Napoleon in his world empire building. Frantz Fanon's teacher was a man who was born on Martinique, and his name was Aimé Césaire. And he lived to be almost 95 years old, born in 1913, and passed away in 2008. Aimé Césaire is one of the influences on a still living very great poet. His name is Will Alexander, and he's born, raised, bred, roams still in Los Angeles, but has resonances increasingly in other parts of the world, but has a literary heritage that has a great deal of the Aimé Césaire surrealist quality, which, though born in Martinique, became extremely talented as a young man and went to Paris to go to a lycée, to school, and eventually worked his way up so that he became quite a significant figure. And by the time that he was in 1935, he was able to pass the exams to go to the École Normale Supérieure, and there he met a fellow Afro having to wear a mask, but a mask from West Africa, Leopold Senghor. And the two of them and a third friend formed a publication, a magazine, and it was French, en français, and it was L'étudiant noir, the black student. Within a very short time, Césaire began a very long poem that was not to be finished until the late 1930s, 1939, but not really published because publishers refused to publish it until 1947. And its title in translation in English is A Return to the New World. And it is this quality of the ambiguities of Caribbean life and culture in the New World, and he largely refined it because he finally married his lifelong love his best friend, his shared person, Suzanne Roussy, in 1937, and they moved back to Martinique in 1939, about that time with their young son. And it was there that they formed the new literary publication, Tropiques. And they were out to show that there was a much more legitimate identity for them, because they could take off not only the colonial mask, but they could take off the white mask as well. The European style of not just colonizing a place, but of colonizing a race. And that this extended in a very surreal mode, that once one was able to transcend the limitations of a place and of a race, you had a leg up on being able then to disinvolve yourself in the corrupt involvement, the forced involvements in all kinds of deceptions. And so one became aware that you are being lied to in every which way. And thus, it gave a new quality of understanding that freedom is something which is scalar. And to seek to find that one of the qualities that Césaire took up was to write poetry as well as plays, in addition to his teaching, where he understood this is really education not to fit in, not to have this or that aspect of this or that identification, but that somehow there was a real identity that was actually surreal in terms of the world that was in swirl of manipulation. Césaire was extremely powerful in his influence on Will Alexander, who at the same time, being born and raised in South Central LA and at home on the vast network of streets of Los Angeles, where there is no holding colonization at all. Hardly anyone out of 16 million people would think of Sepulveda Boulevard as being the old fence line of the Sepulveda Ranch, running from Palos Verdes into the San Fernando Valley. One rancho, one family complex. Los Angeles does not have a traction with almost all of the false identities. And as a consequence, it's unlike almost any city in the world now, but is very like a city that was problematically the greatest city of the ancient classical world, and that city was Alexandria in Egypt, which was Egyptian, but founded under a Macedonian Greek, not even Athenian Greek, but Macedonian, which is really in what we would call today closer to what Yugoslavia was. But it also had elements of Judaism heavily involved. It had trading routes that reached all the way from India to Ireland and through the Straits of Gibraltar, following the old Phoenician routes all the way down the coast of Africa and up the coast of what is today Portugal and Spain, and into the Black Sea and into the stretches of the Red Sea, down into Africa, especially because for 5,000 years the high civilization of Egypt was African. African to the extent that the most powerful of the early influences in the pharaonic line was a pharaoh named Zoser, who was a black African Egyptian pharaoh, and whose right-hand man was not only his personal physician, but his royal architect, Imhotep, also a black African. So that you had this quality where the deepest roots of classical Alexandria were Egyptian. So much so that the Alexandrian dynasty, the Ptolemies, heavily styled themselves to look like ancient Egyptian pharaohs. And so this quality of a black African root to the Alexandrian, almost colloquially a polyglot world civilization, a swirl, but it was a swirl with a Greek Hellenistic spoon, not just Greek, but Jewish Greek, Hellenistic. And also what it was stirring was a stew that was heated by Africa, by the energy of Africa. And one can see in Zoser his architect Imhotep together like the physician artist of the wizardry of eventually millennia later, a Merlin. Zoser was like millennia later incognate with a Merlin, King Arthur. He was the stylizer of the way in which a symbolic form archetypally became the high water identifying identity of Egypt, and that is the pyramid. It is Zoser and Imhotep that bring the black African quality into Egypt so that the true pyramid occurs for the first time through the bent pyramid that really didn't work, that was based on just using the stack of the step pyramid, to finally refining and understanding that there was an archetypal geometry going on here, and with the red pyramid, the first true pyramid at Giza. Nearby in Saqqara. That whole region, beginning with Saqqara and Zoser and Imhotep, and then moving on very rapidly after that in the Old Kingdom to the pyramids of Cheops and Khephren and Mycerinus. And one began to understand that here the quality was that reaching from earth into the heavens, and that the constellation of Orion, with the belt of Orion being the great pyramids. And one began to have the sense that there was something here, that there was indeed a hidden identification and identity, really alien to the false cultures that were developed exclusively in trying to dominate and to limit the world of our, quote, normal surroundings. All of this came to a head in the 1930s, 1940s with Aimé Césaire as an influence on Will Alexander's work, and one of the great collections of his several dozen volumes now, is Inside the Earthquake Palace, with a cover by Will. He is also a great artist and musical composer, as well as a poet, a playwright, and a prose writer. 4 plays Inside the Earthquake Palace, where the two protagonists talk in the little country area of Montserrat just before a volcanic eruption would devastate that area. One of the protagonists is named Giotto, the other Raphael, always referred to by his last name, Locano, in the play. And there is this interchange between them that eventually teases out a peculiar quality. Act 1 of 5, rumbling noises, slight shaking of table and 2 chairs. Giotto and Locato are seating across from one another, intently conversing, sipping from glasses of spiced rum under falling cinder and orange-red lights. Giotto looking down at his folded hands, even if I perish by inhaling the sulfurs, I'll be illuminate in defeat. I've felt I've escaped the lists, Mr. Locato. They're cold and brazen, and until now I've always sought the safety of lists. Locato staring at Giotto intently. So, you've come to Montserrat as some form of liberty, some test of nerves to photograph extinction, and goes on from there. And the two begin to discover that they are unalike, though understanding what Franz Fanon had come to understand from Césaire's teaching, that black skins in white masks, that there are many masks that are going on. It's not simple whatsoever. And that the skins have a whole scalar of tones. And that this quality of influence on Will Alexander and on the world, Césaire's famous for coining the word negritude, that there is a subtle, poetic, kaleidoscopic insight, quality that the African primal origins of a species still has a current. There is a wonderful collection of early books of poems, Kaleidoscopic Omniscience, that includes a number of his early volumes. One of them, almost unavailable now, is Asia and Haiti, and not a part of it, his very first book of poems came out in 1987, Vertical Rainbow Climber. And Asia and Haiti came out just a little later and has a tremendous advance in the ability to give a quality of exploring into not just the unknown, not even just the surreal, but to a vastness of poetic that is not identifiable, but is discoverable, as long as one eschews settling into identities and identifications that are almost generically misleading and corrupting. This requires something beyond the surreal, and another deep influence on Will's work is the High Vajrayana, personified in a book that came out. Its title is a collection of essays by Jeffrey Hopkins. And it was meaning meditation on emptiness, published by Wisdom Publications in London. And many pages, 6 long sections, not just chapters, on the way in which there is a subtle development in the Vajrayana, in the diamond path, that shows again and again that the deception of identity, of identification, is endemic to a quality not just of a culture or of a time period or of a space place, but endemic into the very scalars and complexities that require a squeezing of that fruit of the center of one's self and freeing the juices from that fruit to flow into new possibilities, new ways of being. One of the great beginnings in Asia and Haiti, Asia with Jeffrey Hopkins in the Vajrayana, Haiti with Césaire, with his Martinique confrères, and the very beginning of the Haiti. There's a quotation from Maya Deren's great work on, she did a wonderful work on the origins and meaning of voodoo and so forth. These undistinguished dead become known as that anonymous heritage, les morts, the dead. We, bubonic, with blackened, altering transmissives, with burning nerve links and schisms, twisted in piercing soils, in dark prematurity and rage, we are dead. We, the pressure and the cyclone of Haiti, savage with usurpation, with claustrophobia by scarab, by blood loss and groaning, we who've taken spikes from our entrails, from suns we've had exploded in our nostrils, we who were spawned in harassment, in catastrophic silicate meanderings, in acidic neutral complexity. This quality of emergence at the end of a whole time form, not just the end of an age, which is a Roman Empire stylization. You talk about colonialism. It's still alive. You can check on your Al Jazeera channel of your TV today. They have a whole series on the battles that Pope Francis is fighting with his own structure in the Vatican. He refuses to live in the Vatican. He lives in a hotel room. He will not take the royal pontifical car. He drives with a driver in some old car, a man of the people, who says the entire curia, that selective body, have become manipulators and are corrupt and have been for generations. They own, just in the city of Rome, 24,000 buildings. The rental they get is close to $900 million each year. All of that is dwarfed by the take from the United States. Is $172 billion a year. Worldwide, they have 22,000 cathedrals and chapels. It is a quality of surreality that not just boggles the imagination, it gags and asphyxiates the very identifications that are delimited by laws, by courts, by police, by military, by design, by inculcation, by emphasis, by education. One of the great Vajrayana figures of about 600 years ago was Tsongkhapa. And Tsongkhapa developed a whole ecology of learning the way of liberation into freedom, and founded what became the Gelugpa sect of the Vajrayana, headed by the Dalai Lama. Our current Dalai Lama, for whom Jeffrey Hopkins was the translator for several decades, organized conferences for him where one could have collections like Kindness, Clarity, and Insight, the Dalai Lama at Harvard, etc. This Dalai Lama says that he is the last, that lineage is coming to an end with him. He's going to be 80 this year, 2015. How does a bodhisattva have a lineage that comes to an end? Let's take a break.